Today's special Wasteland Spotlight takes us far out into the remote California desert once again, this time to look at a growing problem in the region. And I mean literally growing. We're going to take a peek at some of the cartel and Chinese national managed illegal grow operations that are taking the desert and the country by storm. This is a problem with a scope much bigger and farther reaching than just the issues around the product being produced, and the damage being done is significant. Most people tend to think that the desert is just a barren place with little agriculture beyond some subsistence gardening, but come along with me today and I'm going to show you that the desert is actually a lot greener than you may think. Welcome to the Wasteland, my friends. Illegal grows are everywhere out here in the desert. This large site here is one that was only recently taken down by a law enforcement raid, to the tune of a multi-million-dollar loss for the location's illicit operators. Still, as staggering as that might seem at first glance, it's a drop in the bucket for these guys. For every operation that gets canned like this one, 3 or 4 others are completed to a successful harvest. The desert southwestern U.S. region is still a bit of a wild west in terms of crime and opportunity, and the people who live or work out here are no strangers to it. Before we get into the bigger picture, let's have a little talk about this particular location that I'm scouting right now. We still have some people out here, which you'll see in a moment, though most of them stay hidden from the drone once they know it's there. Even though the site was raided and broken down by law enforcement, there's still a massive amount of supplies and materials left behind after a raid. Typically what these groups will do is station a few losers here to keep an eye on the place. Often these guys are no more than simple drug addicts brought out here for the purpose and happy to oblige as long as their chemical needs are being met. They're usually given phones to report in with, food, water, and dope to keep them functioning sorta, and a few dogs to actually do the real work of staying alert and looking for intruders. Intruders like me. Our guy here in the red was no doubt roused from whatever stupor he was in by one of the many dogs kept nearby. The dogs probably alerted to the drone during one of the first flyovers I did. Some dogs are loose here while others have been set up in these makeshift kennel areas. It seems like they have been putting in some work getting some of the stuff put back together, the living quarters here in these trailers probably getting done first. An excellent job for tweakers and such, and a home site no doubt well in line with what they're usually accustomed to. For their bosses, the idea here is just to salvage what's still usable and then end up transporting it to other operations getting started nearby. Only the best and most intact stuff will be taken, while the vast majority of it will be left to rot in the desert sun and make a mess. My other preppers watching this are no doubt already familiar with all those IBC water tanks laying around everywhere, and we know they ain't cheap. All right, same goes for all those large ventilation fans, and at the end of the day, even the conduit greenhouse structures, plastic pots, and irrigation tubing are all worth salvaging. While we all watch the rest of this little scouting flight play out, I'm going to talk a little bit about why the harm being done here is greater than most people even realize. Now, I'm all for the full legalization of cannabis, and even for the right of citizens to grow their own if they want, but this problem here goes far beyond a little weed. First off, the U.S. is in a constant war with drug smuggling cartels, mostly over much harsher drugs, but the profit from these grows here go directly to fund those efforts by the cartels. These aren't mom and pop grows in California's Emerald Triangle, okay? These are major actions being undertaken by the enemies of our country and our society, and as such, they help directly contribute to our collapse. And enemies? Yes, absolutely, because it isn't just cartels and gangs setting these things up now. Recently, the Chinese government has gotten in on the action with their own state-sponsored actors, all right? That's a direct action by the nation that is shaping up to be our chief rival in the coming Third World War. Probably not a good idea to fund their side or have them here in our backyard. Yet, here they are. Whether or not we can do something about that is way above my pay grade. So, as usual, I'm just here today to make all of you aware of the extent of the problem and how it can affect you and your prepping efforts directly. The sad state of affairs out here is a reality that some may find surprising because just today I have visited 13 other operations that were all within less than a 2-mile radius of this one. When these guys do reset after a raid, they don't really go far, and they don't have to. Simply moving on to a separate parcel nearby resets the whole legal process that must be gone through in order to begin a new investigation. And then, if there's funding available, and if there are enough personnel on hand, and if they can get the green light from a judge, then maybe some of those surrounding operations will get added to the list of places to raid next. And that list rarely accounts for more than just a small fraction of the sites in operation just in this little valley alone. The prepper lesson of today is multifaceted, but it starts with operational safety, okay? And a safe operation always starts with good intel and background information. This means first collecting all available data regarding the place you'll be operating in, the specific data regarding the target itself, and the rule that no matter what, when approaching a target area, the drone always goes first. The informational part starts with background stuff, satellite imagery, news, and police reports from the area, parcel ownership checks, and so on. Always make sure to know where you're going and what the potential dangers are that could meet you out there. My video on the prison scouting was a great example of finding the unexpected. Having been to that location multiple times over the years, I expected it to remain abandoned. But at the same time, I entered the area with a measure of stealth and took care to choose my approach vector wisely for maximum concealment and the bypass of potential countermeasures. And it was a good thing that I did. Otherwise, I could have driven my vehicle right up the road and straight into a situation that, at the minimum, would have aborted the entire mission. Instead, I came from the direction that would be least offended, and as always, the drone went in first. Beyond that primary rule, we have the ancillary lessons that apply everywhere in general, okay? The biggest of which is that you absolutely need to stay well aware of what's going on in your area of operations and learn as much as possible before you start setting yourself up there. Desert land's really cheap, and most of it is well sheltered from the hostile incursions of people fleeing the cities after SHTF, and it's unlikely anyone's going to waste a perfectly good nuke targeting the US version of Sandland. Those things and more can make the desert an attractive option for preppers seeking cheap land to set up bases for operation. But something you absolutely do not want is a cartel or Chinese-sponsored criminal operation popping up in your backyard. That's something you want to stop before they get set up and running, or simply be far away from in the first place. Once again, the rule is that the farther away you are from openly available resources, the more private your retreat will be. Bigger picture-wise, raids and enforcement have been increasing, but so have the operations themselves. California really started to get a better picture of what was happening when water management officials started noticing massive spikes in the demand and use of water in these desert regions. They hired security firms and used drones to figure out where the water was going. And it turns out that it was going right into these illegal grow operations that were spreading quickly. Whether from wells, public spigots, or even from tapped fire hydrants, water was being taken away from the communities in massive amounts that were growing sharply. That alone was a major harm to the people living out here. We're going to head to the ground now just so you can get a good look at how these sites are usually hidden from view on the road using earthen berms. I had already pretty much alerted the few people at this spot with my drone, so now it's time for a quick drive-by to give them something juicy to report later to their masters. Even a massive operation like this one is still hard to see well from ground level, even sitting on a slight incline as this one is. Today's quick look is just to get a recent bit of footage to compare with the imagery from subsequent recon flights in the near future. Since this operation is about to be on the move for next season's grows, I want to try and stay on top of the materials and where they're headed. That's a big part of intel analysis, right? Just comparing pictures and video taken at different times to see what changes and how fast. This is how I was spotting the rapid construction of field hospitals along the Ukrainian border before the invasion by Russia. Everyone likes to see tanks and troops and all the flashy stuff, but the real devil is always in the details. As I take a quick look along the side of this spot, you can hear the dogs barking in the background as well as hear one of the local guards give a whistle at me. Whistling is easier without teeth, so I've heard, and if that's true, it must sound like bird calls out here when these guys are chatting with each other. Just a quick bit of a cruise up here to get a brief look at one of the RVs that's parked outside the property, and then we're going to head out on a back trail to get a closer look at some other grows in the area, of which there are many. I'm not sure if this may belong to a visitor or a resident of this little shithole, but it does seem operational. And yet, it's parked off the property along the access road, which is an important legal distinction. At any rate, I won't be stopping to ask today. These farms have always been a thing out here. Small groups or even families with a little property would grow a few dozen or 100 plants to make some cash on the sale later. Illegal for sure, but not really a major issue. But that has changed in recent years. California legalized the plant for recreational use, in part to combat the underground market, but then, being California, they taxed it so heavily that they sent people scurrying right back into the waiting arms of the black market. As the cartels moved away from smuggling material across the border, they turned instead to setting up these huge grow operations out in the desert, often squatting on land that wasn't even owned by them. Sometimes it's just vacant land, sometimes public land, and even on private property that's owned and held by banks or investment firms or other owners who don't really bother to check on what's going on out in the desert. This one we're about to look at now is a smaller one and less than a quarter of a mile away from its massive neighbor that we just stirred up. No tweakers here as far as I can tell, unless one jumps out of the bushes at us, which really wouldn't be a surprise. Let's take a look. Right off the bat, we can see a large collection of those IBC water tanks that I was talking about, just waiting for someone to show interest in them again. Now, I've talked in the past about how abandoned sites offer the potential for salvage of materials and supplies for refugees in a post-collapse world, but when it comes to places such as these, I have an even more contrary opinion than that. As far as I'm concerned, if you're an outlaw or engaged in criminal activity out here, then you're fair game. Now, maybe that's an unpopular opinion, but it's one that I'll stand by and not hide from one bit. The world is a tough place, and it's getting tougher every day, and folks like this who are out here stealing water and resources from already taxed off-grid communities, well, I can't really say much good about them. All right, I fully expect and support that they should receive the full benefits of due process of law from the authorities. However, I'm not one of those authorities, and neither are the regular folks who have to live out here with this mess. If I were one of them, I wouldn't be offering any benefits at all. Because of that, sites like this are a legitimate salvage in my eyes, and anyone who doesn't approve of that is free to click away from the video now. For everyone else, I'll leave it to your imagination as to what I mean by that, and we'll continue on with our video. Cartel operations like this aren't small potatoes, alright? These things can be spread to cover dozens of acres with hundreds of makeshift greenhouses and tens of thousands of plants. Each one of these short greenhouses here alone can hold between 200 and 300 plants. The longer ones about 500 plants. In an excellent growing environment like the California desert with its long sunny growing season, each plant can yield between 1 and 3 pounds of dried product. Call the valuation roughly $2,000 per pound depending on where it's being taken, and we're looking at an average revenue of about $1.5 million per greenhouse. Per grow. That requires a lot of water, and I mean a lot. That's why we see so many tanks out here. It also requires power, but often the newer operations will use the abundant solar energy out here to run things like these large ventilation fans. It used to just be the normal cartels out here, but these days, in addition to the cartels from down south, we also have Chinese nationals from the east getting involved with these massive grow operations. Recently, there was one found that was so large it had a crop valuation of over $1 billion. That's billion with a B. Combating the operations is made more difficult by the sheer number of them, the legal due process involved, and the lack of sufficient manpower and funding. Just recently, in only the small Antelope Valley area in California, over 500 grows were identified by overflying aircraft with the local sheriff's department. In the end, 150 of those were busted, but that left 350 to succeed. A very acceptable margin for our cartels and for the CCP. In fact, since that round of busts, some of the larger operations, they're specifically changing up to spread their hustle, all right, creating multiple smaller locations like this one rather than single massive ones. Each spot, regardless of size, needs its own due process of law. It requires its own warrants, its own operational mission, its own case, and it also still has to be discovered. They aren't all that difficult to find by the air, but many smaller ones are still harder than a single large one. There's just too many of them. Hundreds of thousands of dollars will be spent setting these places up, massive amounts of resources will get bought and used, and then just abandoned in the desert because that amount of money is simply small potatoes for these guys. Ugh, can you imagine living out here in the height of summer, 100 degrees even in the shade each day, stuck in a cramped and worn out trailer like this one, watching plants grow and fearing the long arm of the law with every crunch of gravel you hear? Doesn't sound like a very good option to me, but I doubt the cartels or the CCP give their employees much other option. Still, I don't feel bad about it. Wrong life choices will send your future right down the shitter, and that's not my fault. So another factor in the difficulty of combating these operations is the timing. These places can be set up in a matter of weeks using immigrant labor or even illegals for the process, and then the sprouted plants can be brought in and planted, with the maturity of the plants coming within about 5 months after sprouting. They can be harvested, dried in the naturally arid desert air, and then packaged and transported very quickly. All said, if done right, they can go from start to finish in an operation within 7 months. And often that's faster than the legal process can even act. What a mess out here. Talk about a wasteland. And to think that this post-apocalyptic scene right here is being played out over and over again hundreds of times across just this little section of a single valley where I am today. Just by myself, in the matter of a few hours, I'm going to be visiting and cataloging over a dozen of them. Sites like this one will end up stripped bare over the winter, partially by locals who may come to grab a thing or two for their own homesteads, but mostly by the cartel and CCP workers who are even now out preparing next year's sites for the coming grow season. All in all, they're not really growing plants, you know. That may be the medium they're using, but what they're really growing are things like war, gang violence, corruption, terrorism, espionage, and black ops. Because that's where the money goes, you know. That money's part of a massive web of crime and conquest that is destabilizing the world right now as you watch this. It all goes to help fund the larger goals of nations such as China and Russia. Xi Jinping is sitting at the center of that web like a fat old spider doing much of the directing for global conflict right now. People have always said that it's impossible for a foreign power to invade U.S. soil, but is it? Is it really? But I digress. Let's get going a few hundred yards down the trail so I can show you something about our next grow site. This one here is a great example of how they use these earthen berm walls to hide their sites from viewers at ground level. Most people out cruising along these trails would have a hard time spotting the operation for anything other than some sections of piled up dirt. And piles of dirt, rock, and gravel tailings aren't that uncommon out here, what with all the mining of the past. We can hop out for a closer look before sending the drone in. Most people will just assume it's the ruins of some old mining operation or an ore mill or some other relic of the old days, and these areas are already littered with those as well. So, looking like a heap of old dirt is excellent camouflage in these parts. But an aerial recon tells a different story. As we get closer, you can see how they have literally just pushed sections of the desert landscape together to form up their walls. When they set up a site, the first crews to arrive are the trucks with some smaller heavy equipment, usually just a small dozer and a front end loader. They will level out a section and bulldoze whatever part of the environment that can't run away and clear it for future operations, while at the same time building up the walls to provide a small measure of concealment and also an elevated watch platform. Only after the land is completely flattened and the walls raised will the next crew come in to begin building the greenhouses and laying out all the irrigation tubing and whatnot. Then, sometimes there'll be a brief period where they will station someone nearby just to keep an eye out and see if their activity has been noticed by any curious locals who may report it. After a bit, if it's all clear and no one comes out to see what they've been up to, that's when the real work begins. Usually when you see one that's been left to rot like this, it's been previously raided and no one will come back to it for quite some time. But if they successfully conclude a harvest, they will usually take a lot of the stuff with them when they go to set up the next site, or even come back to a previous site that has been left under careful observation. Which is something that leads me to our next site of the day, down the road just a very short bit. A small CCP grow, and one that never did get raided. Something to notice first about this one is the earthen berm. You can see where the obvious entrance area was walled back up, so there is no path to easily enter the site now, at least with a vehicle. That's usually a sign that the site is still being considered for future use, probably because it was never raided in the past. They'll usually leave a few derelict-type folks out there to keep a half-assed watch over the place, just enough to know if law enforcement ever comes sniffing around. Because if the site stays free and clear, it may get used again. If we meander off to the side a bit here, technically and legally off the property parcel where our grow resides, we can see the inevitable ramshackle dwellings of those who will no doubt just call themselves homeless squatters if questioned. This is where our watchers stay holed up for the winter, keeping an eye on the area and waiting for cops or rangers that would no doubt show themselves if they came out to see the place. Let's go down and give them a spin, shall we? Hey, maybe CCP will see the video and that'll be the end of these guys' easy assignment for the season. While we circle this little tweaker paradise, I do want to talk once again about the incredible advantage you get by having a drone for aerial reconnaissance and observation of your surroundings. These places out here are obviously incredibly unsafe, and that danger usually is something that can help places like this stay under cover and go undetected. The folks that live out here know better than to go walking around in the desert looking for trouble, because trouble is exactly what they're going to find, and it'll see them coming. But an aerial recon platform that can fly and transmit over 10 kilometers away and capture high-resolution video from altitudes way above audio detection levels and all that good stuff, that's just a massive advantage when it comes to staying aware of what's going on in your neck of the woods. And my little Mini 4 Pro here is one of the small, simple platforms. I can't even imagine the trouble I could get myself into with an enterprise model. Anyway, get a drone. You won't regret it. Tweaker Paradise is right when it comes to this place. Yikes. Looks like whoever is here has collected just about everything that might be useful in the area, although I will use the term useful lightly. The rest of the world might not have caught up yet, but this dude's life is definitely a wasteland. But they are absolutely employed because there's no doubt that whoever's here has instructions to call in any suspicious presence in the area, and that includes yours truly. I excel at being suspicious these days. What a mess. Got some assorted solar panels down there and looks like a mountain bike next to them for transportation, because I definitely doubt the Crystal Palace there is running too great these days. And here in the center is possibly the largest single pile of cup and can trash I've seen outside of a dump. Lovely. Let's head over to the Grove for a low pass and leave this rat's nest behind. As we come in, we can immediately see that this place had better quality greenhouse structures, the skeletons of which are still standing. Easily ready for another round of action, just have to bring out new plastic to replace the old and you're ready to grow. Like I mentioned during the flyover, you can see in the front there where the old entry through the wall was sealed up on their way out. And I promise you that's not a service offered by the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department. Also, had the place been raided, they would have torn the greenhouse structures down quite a bit more. Something else I wanted to mention, if you notice the little box truck and old RV off to the side, this is one of those places where stolen RVs and such come to die. Not much resale potential for them, but snatching one up off the street and taking it out to the desert is a quick and cheap way to provide some bit of shelter for the caretakers left to watch the plants. Yet another way that these illegal grows will negatively affect the community. But unfortunately, that is only one of many negatives. Another one that is probably the least known of all is how these grows can contribute to ruining the lives of the very people who were set up out here to watch over them. And no, I don't mean the cartel thugs or the tweakers or any of those guys. I mean others who are actually innocent in the whole mess. Now, this particular site that I'm pulling up to now was an illegal grow that was primarily built and staffed by illegal aliens. That's not an uncommon thing, but in this case, some of those aliens had their families with them when they were put here to work off their immigration fees by caretaking the site. Women and children lived here amongst the plants and the thugs and all the rest, forced to spend their days in fear of discovery while most likely being used as collateral to keep the men of the families in line until their service was complete. Now, I'm not going to speculate further. I like to stick to the facts as I uncover them, but in this case, the facts are that when this site was raided, there were several families of illegal aliens living here in pretty squalid and unhealthy conditions. There's a lot that's wrong with people in this world, all right? We're a flawed species, and in my opinion, one that's not quite ready for the level of civilization that was thrust upon us so quickly, but it takes a particularly low type of person to even consider the use of children as collateral or bargaining chips or any other thing. I'm not going to spend much time here. It's depressing to think about how bad this world is to the most vulnerable and how much worse it'll get as collapse approaches. But I do hope that the people that do these types of things, I hope they get everything they deserve in life, right? Every last thing they got coming. So that's a natural segue into the next little tactic I wanted to talk about that's used by some of these illegal growers. Because there's more than just the major cartels and CCP operating out here, okay? There are smaller operations often run by just a few asshats with bad ideas, or even common gang members and thugs from California who are looking to upgrade their criminal operations. For smaller teams, one tactic they will use is taking over existing sites, either actual grows that were abandoned by the other big players in the game, or in the case of the spot we're looking at now, existing private homesteads. This site here was once a newly minted homesteading attempt by some private owner. They had built small but more permanent greenhouses for growing food on their property. Unfortunately, as sometimes happens, life or the world got in the way of those plans. Maybe finances didn't work out, maybe there was an illness or family problems, who knows? What we do know is that the homestead failed for whatever reason and was abandoned. Still owned by someone, or more likely someone's estate, but for all intents and purposes, abandoned. Until it was found by some people looking to turn it into a little grow operation to make some quick cash. In the process of that, we see some of the same vandalism and board destruction that we see at many other sites. Shot up vehicles, broken glass, and all the rest. People who own a property usually don't just destroy cars on it for fun. The shipping container here was most likely the storage for the old homestead, maybe a temporary use living area or even a workshop. We can see where it had originally been locked up and later cut open. Nothing inside but a makeshift kitchenette here in the front. Some food left behind. Expired in 2017. And the oldest eggs I have ever seen intact. Did you hear that one? The pressure buildup made it pop pretty loud, kind of startled me. You can actually hear the dried up insides rattling around in there. This little stove doesn't look like it was ever cleaned the entire time they were using it here, which is super gross. Something common I've seen on these sites is removing the seats from derelict vehicles in the area to create chairs to use. And this is a hell of a lot of Santeria candles. All right, let's get out of this mess. We can go around and take a quick look at the side and the greenhouses. It's a real shame just how many homesteads there are out here that have failed for whatever reason. Every time I come to places like this, I'm left a little sad thinking about how this was once a place that represented someone's dream of freedom and independence from societal dependence, but in the end the task proved too rough, or the bad parts of society managed to find their way in and destroy the dream. This spot will most likely get used again in the future, given the solid structure of the greenhouses and the shipping container already present. Just across the way there are remains of another small grow operation, and there's actually several more just within sight of this place. These grows are simply everywhere out here, and seeing just how many I can visit in just a few short hours, I'm astonished at the scale of the operations and the sheer magnitude of the problems faced by law enforcement. The fact that this is a problem that is already beyond what society can deal with and still growing exponentially, it reinforces one of the fundamentals that I know about crime in general, and that is that there is a tipping point for all criminal activity. A point at which there is simply so much of a given crime happening that the police simply can't stop it, or even respond to each one in any real form. Whether that's something like these illegal grows out here, or more simple things like the growing amount of large-scale shoplifting that is spreading around the country. It doesn't matter what the crime is, it only matters that once the tipping point is reached where it can't effectively be stopped anymore, then it really gets out of control. Because others see it, and they see the ineffectual actions of law enforcement, and they realize one of the most dangerous things of all. They realize that crime actually can pay, and pay very well. That emboldens them to join in, and their actions spawn others, and so on. Another harbinger of the societal collapse that is already underway. The damage that our civilization is absorbing right now, it just isn't sustainable. Crime of such a magnitude as this can't be fought by the rule of law, because part of the problem is that only one side has to play by the rules, while the other side gets to know that playbook in advance and is free to work outside of it. That's always been the case, but only now that the other systems of society are nearing collapse can things like this really reach those tipping points. Once more things do, watch out. When AI destroys half the jobs in this country, or when inflation means more families than not have to go hungry, that's when we're going to see even more people turn against the rule of law and start obeying the rules of nature instead. And in nature, it's a dog-eat-dog world. Think about it. And while you do, stay safe and stay ready, my friends. It's a wasteland out there.